Celebration for the 61st independence anniversary of Nigeria continues nationwide and even among Nigerians in the diaspora. The journey has been a potpourri of ups and downs. In these past 61 years, the nation has been in an out-of-representative democracy, which requires the legislative arm to function effectively.
Absolutely. Well, in 1960, at independence, Jaja Nwachukwu, who was the first Speaker of the House of Representatives, received the instrument of the state from the British government. This is a further indication that indeed the legislature occupies a very strategic position in nationhood, especially in a democracy. So what has become of this important arm of government in the past 61 years after Nigeria's independence?
Absolutely. Joining us this morning is a serving senator of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Dr. Surajudeen Ajibola Basiru. He's a former Attorney General and Commissioner for Justice in the state of Osun. He represents Osun Central Senatorial District under the platform of the governing All Progressives Congress, APC. You're welcome. Good morning, distinguished Senator Basiru. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning.
All right, good to have you in the studio with us. 61 years of nationhood and 61 years of the National Assembly, if you like. What are your thoughts? The type of laws that we make define our democracy. In your own assessment as a distinguished senator and as a legal luminary of sort, tell us, how will you assess how the laws that we make have impacted on our democracy so far?
Yes, while I agree, we are doing 61-year anniversary of independence. It is not the same that we have 61 years of legislative experience in Nigeria. And this has to be brought in proper historical context. There was a military interregnum from 1966 until 1979. Within this period of time, there was no legislative arm of government. Also, after the military struck, December 31, 1983, until effectively May 29, 1999, there was still, no legislative arm properly so called. So I would say that there is a mismatch, or there is a kind of disparity between the age of Nigeria and the age of our legislative experience. Within those periods that I mentioned, what we had were military dictatorship. And military dictatorship, they rule by decree, which is made by the executive. So the essence of military intervention in Nigeria is to put together the executive and legislative power in the military dictator. An attempt by judiciary not to see it as it were dealt with by the supremacy decrees that was made after the landmark case of the Supreme Court in Lakomi and Kekelomola, where they sought to declare unconstitutional certain decree of the government on the ground that it is judicial legislation. So I will say that unlike the three arms of government, the other two arms of government, that is the executive and legislative arm, the legislator had a more a younger experience if the age of their existence will be put into context. So there's a need to put a context that yes, we have 61 years of independence, but we don't have 61 years of legislative experience. Be that as it may, I will say that the history of our legislative experience can be broken into different contexts depending on the type of government that was in place, and of course, the temperament and of the leadership of the National Assembly at those period of time. So they are matter that cannot just be given one fell sweep. First and foremost, you know that in the First Republic, we have a parliamentary system of government whereby the executive are elected, are picked from the legislative arm. Of course, the role of the legislative arm in that regard is to be either for the government or you have a clear opposition in the National Assembly. In 1979, the country opted for presidential system of government, and then you have a new set of legislative experience, which is represented by the presidential system of government. Of course, the extent to which the legislature in that time had been able to keep on to their responsibility, because the responsibility then in an executive presidential system of a legislative arm is basically threefold. One, to make law for the good order of the country. Two, and this will include general legislations and legislation that has to do with appropriation of resources for the economy of the country. Then performing oversight function to ensure that government expenditure are used for the purpose of efficiently and in order to stamp out corruption. Of course, the upper legislative arm, the Senate, where I represent, has additional responsibility of confirming or otherwise key appointment of the executive arm. Of course, in the second republic, apparently because of a lack of proper checks and balances, I don't think the democratic experience really worked. That paved way, unfortunately, for military dictatorship on December 31, 1983. And then the first victim of what has happened is the legislative arm, which was sacked, and then the lawmaking became activity of the military dictators, both at the federal and at the state level. Of course, since 1999, we have had also myriads of experience, some of them very commendable, some of them unpalatable, some of them had actually created a serious challenge which we continue to face, particularly in the Net Assembly, to be able to change the perception of the Nigerian population as to the necessity, acceptability, and the relevance of the Nigerian legislative arm to the democratic experience that we have. So because of those circumstances, we have a situation whereby the legislative arm is still unfolding in being able to assert itself as a separate arm of government that has the necessary requirement to be able to entrench democracy, rule of law, and perform the work of doing good government in the country. I think that's a broad overview of what I can say, unless there are specifics which I will be able to address.
Well, thank you for taking us through that history of Nigeria's legislature since 1960s. Well, you know, some analysts say as a nation, we have moved fast in the wrong direction in terms of putting in place the structures that will deepen our democracy. And that the same ethnic sentiments and corruption that plagued the First, Second, and Third Republic are threatening our democratic dispensation, while others say that the fundamental problem is the constitution that we are running on. Some are calling for the 1963 constitution to be reinstated. Could that really be the solution to our problems?
You see, in a country of 180 or 200 million Nigerians, you cannot but have different opinion, different perspective on different issues. So I've also had some of those sentiments expressed. But what I know is that Nigerian democracy and the Nigerian state is evolving. For any evolving society, there will definitely be challenges. And of course, even in advanced democracy, there are always challenges. The ability of the country and the leadership to be able to meet these challenges is actually the test of competence and the legitimacy of those government. Talking about the call to reversal to 1963 constitution. Yes, it's always good to have possibly nostalgia and atavistic sentiment. But the question is that Nigeria of 2021 is certainly not Nigeria of 1963. And a lot of things that, in terms of population, in terms of the demography, and in terms of even the interface that the country had with the international community. I agree that there needs for us to look at our constitution and ensure an effective devolution of power so that the federating unit will be able to play very vital role in the area of governance. There are certain matter that I think are not necessarily need to be within the ambit of exclusive legislative arm of government. For instance, agriculture. As far as even the Nigerian constitution is concerned, the agriculture should be its only area of research and planning and financing that federal government should have business with agriculture. The same thing with mining of mineral resources, the same thing with even the registration of a company. What should be the business of a Nigerian federation talking about registering business in Osogbo, in the Kinu, and in other places when those businesses possibly don't even operate outside the confine of a particular local government? So there are actually compelling need for us to look at our constitutional arrangement in a way that devolve power and make governance to be meaningful for the people at the grassroots. But that is not to say and cast away the totality of our democratic experience. I was engaged in a debate some few days ago on the relative development of our country vis-a-vis the military dictatorship and other democratic governance. And I will tell you that being somebody who had been involved in governance at my state level before coming to national level, whether you like it or not, as a politician, you are under the pressure to perform and deliver to a certain extent, because you know after every 4 years you will submit yourself to the mandate of the people. If democracy is sustained in the country, if rule of law is upheld, and if democratic elections is made to be free and fair, the draw towards good governance will definitely be able to address the present challenges that we face in the country.
Well, thank you very much, Senator. If we take a few steps backwards and look at 2015, the APC-led National Assembly at that time has been described by some commentators as the most independent. An example of that, I'd imagine, would be when the Senate refused to confirm President Buhari's choice the Senate had refused to confirm the ex-EFCC boss, Ibrahim Magu, who as we know, was the president's choice, is an example of that independence. That being said, despite the commendations of that assembly, there were also, it also wasn't exempt from dramatics there. You had an example of the likes of Dino Malaye and what many had described as very serious threats to a female senator during that time. When you look at that assembly, would you agree that it was the most independent, or did you think too that it had its own share of imperfections?
I think the first is that when you want to make an assessment, the assessment of the effectiveness of a legislative arm should not be on the barometer of independence, if that I may use that word, or antagonism to the executive. It's about what will be the measure of legislation they have made that have impacted on the country, what have been the level of intervention they have made working to be able to address the primary function of legislative arm. And I will say that the 8th Assembly, and with all sense of responsibility to those who are at the leadership at that time, failed Nigerian people. When you have a situation whereby you keep on passing legislations that never get assent of the president, it shows that you have wasted legislative hours. When you delay appropriation in a staccato manner to the extent that a country that rely on public expenditure as drivers of its economy cannot even predict budget cycle throughout the period of that 4 years, that assembly has not performed creditably well to the aspiration of Nigeria. We must be able to make separation between issues of personal aggrandizement, which some may want to play out in the political contest, and issue of national interest, which the National Assembly should symbolize. And I say this to say that put side aside, in terms of performance, in terms of delivering on appropriate legislation that further development of the country, in terms of scrutinizing and performing oversight function, I think the cooperative model, which some people, naysayers, call rubber stamp model by the Net Assembly, has done very well and better than Nigeria. And I'm exultant in this regard. The Petroleum Industry Act that had been in the pipeline and put the oil and gas sector of the country in opacity for close to 2 decades, we have been able to pass it. The deep offshore and profit sharing law was passed in a matter of 2 weeks. This is a law that has created stability in the deep offshore sector of our oil and gas, and of course generated additional revenue of about 150 billion for the country on an annual basis. We have also been able to address to the issue of the Banks and Other Financial Institutions Act, the Police Act, Company and Other Matters Act, as well as other meaningful legislation, particularly in the area of decentralization and the concessionaire of the railway sector within a period of 2 years. More fundamentally, the Ninth Assembly promised that we want to refer to January to December budget cycle. We have been able to do so. And in the context of having a cooperative National Assembly, we're able to have an understanding to even extend the implementation of the capital expenditure arm of the 2020 budget, which was disturbed because of the COVID-19 pandemic, up to end of May 2021 to ensure full implementation of the budget. And for a very long time, we were able to ensure almost 100% of implementation of the capital aspect of the Nigerian budget. These are clear indications of that the cooperative model are being adopted by the Net Assembly works. And also to say that it's not true that Net Assembly always accept every recommendation for appointment and for position sent in by the president. We have had cause to step down. For instance, nominee for INEC positions. In 2 or 3 instances, we have had cause to reject nominee for law reform commission because requisite qualification according to the law and the constitution was not met. But unfortunately, because it appears to be our psyche that the only functional legislative arm is one that shouts, the one that backs, and the one that seeks to undermine the executive is actually the proper one. We will not shy away from responsibility of upholding the law, abiding by the constitution, and ensuring that the executive are taken to task, but will do it in a mature, moderate way that does not unnecessarily create tension in the polity.
All right, distinguished Senator Basiru. I was going to expand the argument so that we go into the area of restructuring and budgeting and size of government. But you can begin to apply your thoughts to that. But we have to go on a short break now. And when we return, I'll present the questions to you so that we can continue with the discourse. You stay with us. To the morning show here on Arise News. We're still on with Dr. Ajibola Basiru, a distinguished senator from the state of Osun, who is also the spokesperson for the Senate. Distinguished senator, I mentioned that I was going to expand the argument slightly and basically to ask you about the question of the restructuring. You know, of course, that this is germane as far as many Nigerians is concerned. The APC campaign on that strong argument that the polity requires a kind of reorientation and a new direction. But it looks like in the last 6 years, not much has been heard from the party and from the presidency. And the main excuse has always been that, it will require constitutional amendment, it will have to go to the National Assembly. What are your own personal thoughts, one? And when you senators and honorables in the House of Reps do go into your caucuses, etc., the meetings that you have, what are your thoughts? What do you think in terms of how Nigeria should proceed with people on a daily basis saying that there should be devolution of power, there should be fiscal federalism, there ought to be restructuring? And then secondly, so that you can take the two together, people have also complained about the size of governance and specifically about how much the National Assembly is gulping. If you look at the 2021 budget, for example, out of the 496 billion allocated for statutory transfers, the National Assembly alone is getting about 134 billion. And people say that this is probably bigger than what some agencies with dealing with millions of Nigerians get. And we are talking about less than 500 people in both houses at the National Assembly. Will that not give a case for the point about unicameralism rather than the bicameral legislature that we are practicing? You know, of course, that Ghana, like 60% of the countries of the world, practice unicameral legislature simply because they want to cut costs. Do you think that that argument can fly in Nigeria? Do we really need two houses of assembly, even though the 1979 constitution requires that, because we went into a federal arrangement? Do you think at this point that we are struggling financially? Maybe, just maybe, we can begin to consider a unicameral legislature.
Okay, thank you. The questions are in twofold. What is the position of my party? And of course, the National Assembly caucus of my party on the issue of restructuring. And then the question of the size of government and possible argument in favor of unicameral, if I get your questions very well, so that I can be able to put it in proper perspective.
Yes.
It is not the case, Steve, that my party has not done anything about restructuring. My party set up a committee headed by no less person than Governor El-Rufai, the sitting governor of Kaduna State, and which also has the former governor of Osun, the Minister of Interior, and a serving senator, Senator Adetunbi, as a member of that committee on restructuring and devolution of power. So that takes away the argument that my party just started restructuring the manifesto and did nothing henceforth. And I can tell you that at the level of the constitutional review exercise, of which I'm a member, some of the fundamental recommendations of the El-Rufai committee are being considered and in the front burner of our current amendment of the Constitution. But as you know, any amendment of Constitution must pass through Section 9 of the Constitution, because that is the existing ground norm, if I may use terminology of a jurist. You can only effect a change of a pre-existing legal framework using the instrumentality of change, and that's Section 9 of the Constitution. This requires not only 2/3 of the members of the National Assembly, but 1/3 of the also resolution of the 2/3 of the resolutions of the Houses of Assembly. So it is not strictly a party affair, but it's a national affair and legislative affair. But I am very optimistic that certain fundamental resolutions of some of the issues will come from the current constitutional review exercise being embarked on by the National Assembly. I will also say that we cannot, and I cannot equate my own radical perspective with that from all other members in the National Assembly, or even the radical perspective of some elements within our party with some others. So in the political party, you have different shades of opinion, and the essence of democratic governance is to be able to aggregate these different views with a view to having consensus, particularly when there's a threshold of acceptance in terms of voting at different levels of this. So I believe the question of restructuring is an ongoing process. Continue to engaging the people at all levels to ensure that we have a country that is able to deliver on good government, security, and welfare of the people. So I'm also in support of, for instance, the need to decentralize the security architecture in Nigeria, because we appear to be challenged by security arrangement in the country, and we need something radical to be done in this regard in terms of restructuring in this aspect. But whether my view will carry the necessary 2/3 majority and that of the representatives in the House of Assembly is a matter that is remain to be seen. Of course, we will not get despondent. We'll continue to put the frontier of restructuring in that regard. On the issue of the cost of governance in Nigeria, I agree with you totally. There's a mismatch between funds available for development, infrastructure, and all other areas of economic development and cost of governance in Nigeria. But what I don't agree with you is the figure that has been brought out is actually not representative of where the problem of cost of governance lies. The 496 billion that you mentioned is even just a fraction of what is in the 2021 budget, and it goes not only to the legislative arm, it goes to the judiciary and some other aspect. Speaking strictly, 13.8 trillion is the size of was the size of the Nigerian budget before the amendment of the 2021 appropriation, and the amendment only relates to intervention for COVID-19 and to improve the capacity of our security forces. So I'll be speaking on the 13.8 trillion budget. Of that 13.8 trillion budget, 5.9 trillion goes to servicing the bureaucracy of the executive arm of government alone, that is personnel and overhead of the executive arm. Of that budget, 125 billion had consistently been the budget of the National Assembly. So assuming, without considering, that 125 billion is taken away from the budget of 13.8 trillion, will it affect delivering on some other areas of governance? But considering the size of the executive, 5.9 trillion, I think our focus should be on how do we reduce the size of the executive arm of government in a way that will be able to free resources for the purpose of advance of our people. And to be able to get the clear picture of what I'm saying, only 4.1 or so trillion is available for capital expenditure, because another 3 so trillion is going to issue of debt servicing, which is also a current expenditure, which is called debt servicing recurrent expenditure. The non-debt recurrent expenditure is 5.9 trillion. So I agree with you perfectly. There's a need to restructure cost of governance in Nigeria, but the focus should not just be on legislative arm, but an holistic perspective that takes into cognizance that the large chunk of our national expenditure is going to servicing the bureaucracy of the executive. There are so many agencies, parastatals that are being funded in terms of even only the personnel and overhead, without even resources available for them to perform the primary function that they have done. So I'm agreeable to the perspective there's a need to look at the structure of governance in Nigeria with a view to ensuring that large savings is made for the purpose of addressing infrastructure and economic development. On the issue of unicameral or bicameral, it's not about the question of restructuring and addressing cost of governance should be taken away from a deeper on the issue of seeing Nigeria as an heterogeneous society. Yes, you are given a statistics that 60% of the countries in the world have adopted unicameral system. But your statistics has also not been able to address the fact that countries that have adopted federal system of government are countries with population of between 100 million and more, for which Nigeria comes into it. And also the heterogeneous nature of Nigerian society, as well as other society, has affected the need for them to adopt a bicameral legislative system. And what is this bicameral legislative system doing? If you adopt a unicameral legislature in a Nigerian society like ours, you have a situation whereby you have only, the majority making impact and dominating all aspects of human life. So the adoption of bicameral is not just to give job and give a source of livelihood to Ajibola Basiru, but to ensure there is some safeguard to ensure that the dominant ethnic nationalities don't have the requisite dominance on the polity and important issues of national development. And that is why adopting a bicameral legislature, Bayelsa, for instance, with 8 local governments, have 3 senators. Osun, with 30 local government, also have 3 senators. Kano, with 44 local government, have 3 senators, and so on and so forth. So you have the basis of representation of the House of Representatives is geography, population, and so on and so forth. But in the case and landmass, but in the case of the Senate, you have based on equal representation to ensure that there is a check on the possibility of abuse of majority by the major ethnic nationality in Nigeria. That is my understanding of the underpinning philosophically of what's involved in bicameral legislative system in Nigeria.
Well, we are talking about restructuring across board. I agree with you as well. I would like to know your thoughts on the issue of state religion, which many say is the reason behind some of the religious crises across the nation, especially in the northern part of the country, where despite the claim that we operate a secular constitution allows Sharia to be practiced and raised to the standard of state religion.
I beg to differ with you on that matter. Nigeria is not a secular state. Nigeria is a multi-religious state. And what the constitution enjoins is that we should not adopt, and the country or the state should not adopt any religion as a state. But as somebody who is well versed in Islamic law, I will tell you that Sharia is not religion. Sharia is a different, distinct legal system. Just like you have the Anglo-Saxon legal system, you also have the French legal system. So Sharia is a legal system quite different on its own, apart, I mean, from, so the question of utilizing, I mean, Sharia does not mean that you have adopted Islam as a state, I mean, religion. And when you look, and we must be very clear about this, when you go to the northern part of the country, and I say it with all fact, in all nooks and crannies of that region, you see, I mean, religious organizations that are not, I mean, Islamic, flourishing and developing and having their followership. You see, the problem we have is politicization of religion. It has something to do with the practice of Sharia. Even in the the western part of Nigeria, the personal law, Islamic personal law, is recognized as part of the plurality of the Nigerian legal system. A very interesting scholarly exposition of the plurality of the Nigerian legal system was done by my teacher, Professor Ayo Agbede. Nigeria is a plural state when it comes to legal system. And that is why you see the customary law of different ethnic nationalities and Islamic personal law coexisting with the English law on several matters. Many people engage their marriage under customary law or Islamic law. That does not allow some to adopt their own under the English law. So it's a complex matter of application of law and not a question of politics. So the question of application of Sharia components of a particular religion does not mean that state has adopted religion as a state, religion. And that is my humble view in that regard.
All right, distinguished Senator Basiru, thank you very much. I would have loved to take you up on the gender balance in the National Assembly. A lot of people say that it's a very, very masculine National Assembly. Let's hope that, there will be more female representation in both houses of the National Assembly, so that in a short while, who says that we cannot have the most distinguished Senator Oji and Honorable Adefemi Akisoya. So thank you so much, Dr. Ajibola Basiru. It's been a beautiful moment with you, and we believe that you'll come again.